welcome to Lead Line, reminding you of your personal genius and how you think in order to actualize what you desire.
Well, hello again to those of you who've been with us since the beginning, and those of you who are joining us for the first time, greetings. I have a wonderful guest today, and this gentleman I've known for a number of years. We used to work together at Stanford, and I saw him as this brilliant individual who just very elegantly and without any fanfare moved through various spaces, and yet with a sense of clarity in terms of values, beliefs, understanding about his responsibility to life itself, focused on people, organizations, the broader environment. His name is Andrew Lisac. We call him Drew, and those of us who know him well, we call him Andy. And we're here to discuss a very important topic: the power of diverse leadership, especially an introduction to philanthropy and personal impact. So as I highlight Drew's bio, some of his background, and I'm going to go a little bit longer than I typically do because of the significance of what he's done in his short life. I want you to be thinking about your own leadership, your mindset in particular. And I want you to think about how you give, when you give, why you give. I think you're going to find this discussion rather compelling, at least inspiring, and ideally you walk away with tools that you can use. So Drew's currently leads Atlas Communities, a philanthropy, government advocacy, and strategic affairs consultancy organization. And for 25 years, he has led successful philanthropic efforts across the country, as well as globally, in cities like Atlanta, Houston, New Orleans, New York, Detroit, and Oakland, California. He currently works with philanthropic partners on anti-bullying policies in public schools, mental health initiatives with state legislators, foster care improvements for youth, and measures to combat systemic racism. To date, Drew has been awarded grants that total 49 plus million. As a funder, he has successfully won over $158 million in raising and has written, edited, and or reviewed well over 400 fundraising proposals. So he's steeped in this particular area. But let me tell you a little bit more about his background. His core values literally are about civil rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to be more specific as well. Multicultural arts and performances, entrepreneurship for Blacks, Indigenous, people of color, and the protection and restoration of nature areas in service of reversing climate change. He's worked across 24 states, not just the ones that I mentioned, overseeing executive directors and their boards, leading fundraising, and he managed an annual budget nearly $50 million. In one of his key roles as executive director of Playworks, a social justice organization focused on youth in our nation's most challenged and under-resourced public schools. He's also been in other leadership roles, and he considers himself, and I have witnessed him as a servant leader. Arts Commissioner for San Francisco, Executive Director of the Bay Area Bridge Trail, a 400-mile green belt of open spaces with the first outdoor education workshops for children from urban schools. Executive Director of Friends of a major theater and economic renewal project in Oakland, the Fox Theater. Dean of the Harvey Milk Institute, the first continuing studies program for the LGBTQ community, founder of Altamira, enterprises supporting multicultural arts producers and productions led by young people, founder of Oakland Entrepreneurial Events. I can go on and on and on. And that last one supported startups for BIPOC entrepreneurs, or Black, Indigenous, and people of color entrepreneurs. He's founded Earth Dance Theater. He's a political strategist against voter suppression, anti-gay, and anti-trans initiatives. Over his 25 years of public service, this gentleman has worked directly with many elected officials nationwide, including our current Vice President Kamala Harris, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Governor Gavin Newsom of California, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, Senator John Ossoff of Georgia, and Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, and Stacey Abrams, we know, of Georgia. I mean, we can go on. He's been instrumental in areas that have to do with climate change, as I think I've suggested, but certainly initiatives that affect 100 cities, the San Francisco Watershed Protection Plan, Parks Plan, multicultural education in our national parks. This man cares. And as a result, he's been honored by many different organizations, including the California State Senate, the California State Assembly, the city and county of San Francisco, various other cities and counties nationwide. At his core, he is about making a difference, adding value. And you can see him behind the scenes, if you're lucky, really making a lot of things happen. Sometimes he's in front, but it's not important to him to be in front. It's important for him to make a difference. And so, to this topic, the power of diverse leadership, an introduction to philanthropy and personal impact, I am honored to welcome my friend and a remarkable leader, formal and informal, Andrew Lisac, or Drew.
Thanks, Elnora.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much.
I know you don't like that long stuff, but I hope you don't mind that I did that.
I'm a little embarrassed, but yeah, that's okay.
Good to see you. Very good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So I'd like for you to share something that the public does not know. You can't find it in social media, and yet it really speaks volumes about who you are.
Okay. Well, actually, this just happened to me. I live in Atlanta, in North Atlanta, in Newt Gingrich's old congressional district, which is now a blue congressional district. Lucy McBath, an African-American woman who started as a stewardess, and her son, unfortunately, was killed in a violent act, and she's now our congresswoman. So it's one of those districts, you know, kind of that is in the process of change. But loving living here because I live basically in a forest. My backyard is a forest. And so what people don't really know about me when they see me on these calls is like, I can get up and like in 5 feet, look out my back window and see deer in my backyard, just kind of resting, doing what deer do. And they have been so joyful to have with me through the pandemic, you know, when everything else is going crazy. I can just kind of look out there and say, okay, good. The deer are here. They're fine. They're safe. They're sleeping.
Yes. And therefore you probably are fine as a result.
Yeah, exactly. And it touches on some of the things you mentioned. I'm a huge proponent of nature and protecting nature. And so it's nice to kind of see it on a daily basis.
That is awesome. Well, I'm so happy for you. And I am even happier for me because I get to visit hopefully in the near future.
Oh yeah. Come on down. Mi casa es tu casa.
Well, I want to dive right in because I'm sure people want to know. They want to know your perception about leadership, and specifically, what is diverse leadership? What is meant by that?
The way that I interpret it, and I think everyone has their own interpretation, but I interpret it as each person realizing their own unique genius. I love the way that you've framed this whole sort of series that you're doing. And by genius, I mean the original Latin meaning of it, which is your own individual spirit. Like, how did God make you unique? And then what do you bring that's unique to the world? And that really is truly the basis of diversity, I think, all God's children, you know? And so sharing that for the betterment of our society, That's the first part of it. But then the second part of it, which touches on, I think, what we'll be talking about a lot today, is encouraging others to do the same. So first is doing it for yourself, and the second part is encouraging others to do it for themselves too.
I love that. The simplicity of that. We get caught up in a lot of the human constructs that really do not fully honor the fact that at our essence, we are genius. We only have genius predispositions and areas that could be honed into expertise, but we are, by our very nature, genius.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm often asked about this because I say this bit about the genius part a lot, but the word has come to mean something that's kind of elitist, right? That genius means that you're super smart and you went to a great college or whatever. And that's more of a modern twist on what the original term actually was. The original term was each person has their own unique genius. And when you look at the world that way, it completely transforms and even radicalizes the way that we approach our neighbors and communities of color and communities that have lower income or the housing values are lower. It's just across the board. It changes the way that you look at everything. Each person is respected for having their own unique genius.
Wow, what a nice way to begin. So the next question, is why is diverse leadership powerful in the philanthropic space, and who can make an impact here?
That, I think, is a great question, and particularly for this moment that we're in right today in 2021. We've gone through some tough times here recently, and there will probably be some more going ahead. But the role of philanthropy in the discussion, I think, is super important, and it's emblematic in some ways, because philanthropy, like the word genius, was really a concept that had elitism attached to it prior to, basically in the 20th century. Philanthropy was something that only really, really wealthy people did, and they did it from a kind of a top-down approach, and it was their way or the highway. And that's, if you believe in what we just said is a good definition of diversity, that's not a good way to do philanthropy, right? So, in my belief, anyone can make an impact. And that means people with money, but it also means people with no money whatsoever. If you just want to see philanthropy as inclusive of, which is the way that I see it, doing work on behalf of other people, that's embedded in the definition of philanthropy, in my view, because it's not just about money. And that's how the word got sort of changed in the 20th century. So as we talk about this today, I want to encourage people to think, how can I work on behalf of the betterment of other people in politics, in my community, in my congregation, in my school, whatever your context is, you can be a philanthropist. And if we all saw each other as philanthropic leaders, imagine what the world would be. Again, it would completely change the way that we're approaching some of the social problems that we have to deal with.
Yeah, well, okay, you just took me there. In the United States, we had, like the rest of the world, we are living with the pandemic, which is jarring in and of itself. It has literally shaken us out of any comfort zone that we thought we may have been in. And those who've lost their jobs and worse off, lost even their homes, or worse off, maybe even their families, and too many have lost family members. This has been a shock to the essence of who we are as a society and as communities and as families and individuals. Then on top of that, we have, what was the January? I don't even want to think of the date, yet it's ever present. And I know folks who are so shocked by
the 6th.
the attempted coup d'etat.
Yeah.
And we're watching it, and it's like, what universe are we in? We're not even in the paradigm that we thought we existed in this country. Yet while some of us understood that level of anger, hate, distress, or whatever it happened to be that took folks from their homes, from the comforts of wherever they were, without masks, to literally convene to harm, to do harm. Oh my goodness. that was further jarring. So when we think about leadership, when we think about mindset, which is this program is so much about, I am prompted to ask you, how is it that we got there? Uh,
Mm,
Given that at the core, we profess as a country to have a set of values and to reflect, even though there's diversity in culture, but to have a macro culture, if you will, a superordinate set of principles that suggest that we're in this together. And yet that didn't reflect that. Why do you think we went there? And how does philanthropy remind us of our capacity to get there? That
yeah.
not a nice question to ask.
Yeah, no, it's a great intellectual question. The history goes back, hundreds of years. As most people know, I've worked in the indigenous space for quite some time. And when you look at capitalism, for instance, and how it approached the quote, the new world, um, it was not done in a way that helped the well-being of other people, right? That's what philanthropy is supposed to be about. That's what actually Christianity is supposed to be about. And yet when you see what was happening with the conquistadors and what was happening with the land stealing, what was happening with the actual genocide, like handing over blankets that were embedded with smallpox so it would kill everyone in that village, when you look at this, then you see that slavery started with indigenous people. There's an excellent article out in the last couple of days about how the Puritans started the slavery in the United States. And then when they ran out of Native Americans, they looked around and thought, oh, we better get some from Africa because we still need people to work our fields and do the hard work and all that other stuff.
Yeah, and the Europeans that they brought over, they wouldn't do it. They couldn't survive.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, exactly. So when you step back from racism and classism and like all these other isms, in what I think is really profound is there's a war going on, I think, and it has gone on for centuries, between people who have a selfish ideology, one that is really just about themselves. And more recently, it's really been heightened with sort of the narcissism that we saw in our previous president. Like it couldn't have been more obvious, but it's been there for all along. You go back to the Puritans; they were pretty selfish too. They did not consider the impact that they were having on other people. So you have this war between selfishness and between the values that are underneath philanthropy, which is promoting the wellness of other people. It's about other people. It's not promoting our own values. We have to take care of ourselves, obviously, but it's about how do we then, once we're taken care of, how do we help other people? And that's where, when you look at kind of this larger span of history, we've got some work to do to kind of reorient this back towards a more balanced approach. And luckily, there's some things going on, one of which happened today, but there are ways in which people are addressing this problem, this war between selfishness and more of a wellness approach to the world.
yeah, and we had a short yet rich conversation before we started the broadcast today about that conversation you had earlier, and then it led us to talk about the notion of capitalism. And from my humble perspective, although it's based upon behaviors, based upon readings, based upon actual research, this predisposition that we have as individuals in the United States, but it's not just localized here, it's across the planet, to be driven by our emotions almost 100%, even though we say, oh, that person's too emotional. The worry we have is to negate our critical thinking faculties, our ability to use a higher level of judgment and defaulting to, well, it feels right or it feels wrong. I'm not talking about intuition, which is a high level intellectual faculty that people tend to say, oh, that's emotional faculty. That's not. It's an actual mental tool.
Yeah.
I'm talking about this predisposition to, because people have listened to particular outlets, via the television, via radio, via reading certain print, through social media or hard copy documents, that they are driven in a certain direction without critically analyzing that. asking the question, is that fact-based, not my truth, your truth, but is it fact-based, driven, based on evidence? And then moving forward. And so I'm going a little bit further than I wanted to, but it draws me back to the question of how to get people to remember their capacity. Wiring, as you just conveyed, historically, is to negate capacity, particular ends that end up causing seas of folks, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of people to move in a direction that doesn't actually serve them.
Yeah, that's right.
An individual or a small group of individuals.
Yeah. Well, and someday maybe you can invite me back and we can talk about this new movement, which I was participating in this morning, called inclusive capitalism, which was sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation and had lots of foundation leaders on this call. Also leaders from corporations, also leaders from communities, community leaders, and it's sponsored by the Vatican. So you have this really rich and interesting coalition or collaboration, if you will, of people looking to change the system that we all live within more towards that balance that we were talking about earlier. And then there's the individual sort of notion of leadership, right? Like, I think when we first talked about this today, I mentioned that we were talking on the day of, or the day after the inauguration. And I said, the thing that really rang the bell for me was, and I think it got sort of overlooked by a lot of people, was including the little boy, what was his name?
Yes.
Oh, I've forgotten his name already. But anyway, I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. The little boy who stuttered that Vice President Biden, the candidate at that time, found at an event and then just reached out to him one-on-one. Like, that was an act of philanthropy. That was an act of saying, I'm like you and you can be like me. I can help you and you can help me. And then he actually got a spot in the videos that were shared out about, this is America. And he read that wonderful, wonderful passage from JFK, which ends with, ask not what you can do for your country, but ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, which is again, sort of guiding people towards this higher set of values about how we approach each other. And so that for me was like the perfect expression of one individual person's nod to leadership. Like, Joe Biden didn't need to include this kid in his inauguration, but he did it. And we don't know what the ripple effects that will have, but I'm sure that there are many. And that's what's wonderful about it.
That young man may end up growing up to own a business and hiring people and empowering them and sharing the business assets with everybody. He may grow up to impact climate change. He may grow up, we don't
Who knows?
And yet the time that our president then elect, and actually then candidate, I believe, who is now our president, Biden took to invest in that young man, made a sea change. And his name, a 13-year-old Braden Harrington.
Yes,
I want to honor, his spirit. We try to honor all spirits. And so one thing that we talked about briefly is there's an assumption that capitalism is A or it's B. Without the understanding, most people have not read about capitalism.
Right.
Some people have and done great study, understand and distilling or identifying the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages, and suggesting how certain changes could occur that actually serves the greatest good, not the limited number of individuals who may have the greatest amount of wealth. And so likewise, most people have not studied socialism. They don't even know what socialism means, and yet they know it's wrong. And they don't think it should ever be in the United States. And yet we have socialist practices throughout this country.
Yeah.
And so what do you say to that when people are being very dualistic in their thinking about something so important, like the nature of our system within which we work and we can leverage? What do you say to that?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you say that it was that you use sort of the idea of dualistic or binary. Like, I love that we live in an era where we're actually talking as a society about non-binary ways of looking at the world, whether it's people and their identities, but also in things like, sort of political or economic structures, right? Like, is it black or white? Is capitalism good? In some ways, it can be good, but it also can be very, very bad. And we're seeing that in income inequalities in our society. So it's not a black or white thing. Same thing with socialism. Like, as you know, I live here in Georgia, and the number one insult leveled at Ossoff and Warnock in the recent campaign was like, oh, they're socialists, oh, they're communists, And I was curious, like, why is this resonating with people? Like, it's such a ridiculous and silly, it's like name calling without anybody understanding kind of what these terms actually mean. So I listened to a lot of talk radio from the, sort of from that side, and watched Fox News. And it's clear that it's just dumbing down the understanding of these terms. And in my mind, it's not about labeling somebody or bullying somebody. It's about understanding how can we work with the system that we've got and improve it. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, it's a way of saying, if somebody wants to be truly philanthropic and they don't necessarily have a lot of money, go into politics. Run for local mayor, run as Lucy McBath did, my congresswoman, like run for Congress. She was not a politician. She had never held a political office before. And now she's the leading sort of expert in Congress for gun safety because it's a personal issue for her. What a perfect example of people just sort of standing up and saying, I'm tired of like listening to everybody else argue about stuff that doesn't matter. I'm going to go be a participant in our political process because that's a way of helping people. So I see a lot of hope in what's happening in our culture, but you're right, like getting rid of this binary approach of like good or bad or heaven or hell or black or white, like, it breaks down in like all these interesting different ways, but it's not useful. It's not helpful to us.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about the whole notion of wealth creation through philanthropy to edify the human spirit. What comes to mind when I just said that?
Wealth creation through philanthropy?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and let me remind the audience that have been with us for a while that we define wealth in the following ways. It's family, healthy family. It's being fit, so it's fitness. It's fun, making time for fun, for enjoyment. That actually edifies the spirit in ways that are incalculable. But we know from scientific research, it's profound. Finance, without a doubt, and beginning with faith. So I should say faith, family, fitness, finance, and fun. So
well, this is great because one way that you could interpret the question that you asked me is, how do you give money away so that you can then earn more money? And I thought that can't be what Elnora is asking me. Yeah. I mean, I know people who do that.
Yeah.
But I don't think we want to talk about that. So yes, if wellness is also, or excuse me, if wealth is thought of as a larger set of things, not just money, then I think that philanthropy, which I see in a radically expanded version, which includes every single human on the face of the planet, then yes, absolutely, philanthropy is one of the best ways to achieve, well, really a lot of these. I just personally speaking, I get a lot of fun out of giving money away, either my own or other people's, or working on projects that I believe in, or what have you. But it also, affects my family, it affects my faith, it affects my fitness, whether we're all stressed out or not, or whether we're feeling, wellness. Like I really embed the word wellness in philanthropy because it used to be in service to welfare of people. And that word, of course, has also changed in the 20th century to only mean kind of how it was demonized during the Reagan era, right? Like everybody remembers that. So I don't use the word welfare anymore because it's a tainted word. It's about wellness. Like, how do we promote the wellness of other people? And your list, family, fitness, fun, finances, and faith, like all of that fits into wellness.
Okay, now we're going to go a little bit deeper. And so this question, you know very well, what should I do as a philanthropist?
Well, yeah. This, I think, is the number one question. And maybe for those that are listening or watching, if I can ask you all to think of yourselves as a philanthropist right now, and let me be really specific. Let's say you woke up this morning and you got a call from your banker or your partner or whomever, and they said, you have $10 million now. And however you got it, like $10 million. And it's more than we're ever going to need. So how do we want to give it away? Like, what are we going to do with this opportunity to give this money away? So just hold that thought and keep it in the back of your brain as we talk about this stuff, because I want us all to think as philanthropists. But this question of what should I do as a philanthropist, again, sort of the definition of philanthropy, the Greek root is love of mankind, which means love of humans. Like, we don't want to be sexist about it. It's promoting the wellness of others, but with this 20th century twist, especially through money, but we're going to ignore that. And it implies wealth and capital plus individual initiative within a capitalist society. So all the things that we were just talking about are embedded within this definition, right? And so some answers that I could throw out there, and these are really for us to just kind of think about as ways to identify what we would do with each of our own little pots of $10 million, is make your wealth abide by your values.
Yes.
That assumes that you have some values and that you thought through what those are. And you talked in your intro to me, I think people sort of got, okay, he's interested in art and he's interested in nature and a series of other things. Those are my values. Those are the subjects that I'm interested in. And I've stuck pretty carefully to those. Like, there's lots of other things that people can be interested in, and hopefully everybody on this call has their own list. But it's important to think through, how do we want to make a difference, right? And what are my values, first of all? So we can all create good wealth and create good philanthropy in a non-monopolistic way and through ways that don't destroy nature. In other words, how we got that $10 million is our first act of philanthropy. If we created our wealth by extracting oil or coal and destroying communities or putting small businesses out of work, thinking of you, Amazon, like, there's all sorts of ways that we can all think of where the wealth creation itself is the number one problem. So start with your values. Like, how are you going to first earn your wealth and make it be part of a do no harm kind of approach? Then, how do we want to apply our philanthropy according to our values? Well, your values shape the way that you will want to sort of present your approach to the world, right? Like, you will probably become, like, if your values are something that I'm not currently involved in, affordable housing. I used to do a lot in affordable housing when I lived in Oakland. But if that's my number one priority, I'm probably going to become kind of an expert at affordable housing. I'm going to ask a lot of people questions. I'm going to talk to, hopefully, Jimmy Carter while he's still alive, but I'm going to talk to the Habitat for Humanity folks, but also like smaller community-based organizations stuff. And guess what? Going back to something you said earlier, it's going to be fun. And so there's one of your sort of wealth components, right? You're going to become an expert. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to get out there and probably get physically fit by building some affordable housing for people. And so that's how you apply your philanthropy according to your values, if affordable housing is sort of what you want. So there's a joy, there's a fun, and there's a real community part of the genius of philanthropy. And then finally, what I would sort of say is that philanthropy also includes leveraging your wealth with others who share your values. It's really, really hard to make a difference on your own. And if you're trying to make a difference for a collective, meaning other people, why would you even want to do that? You probably wouldn't even have philanthropy as a personal activity if you didn't think, oh, okay, I'm going to go out there and just do it all myself. And I know best, and I know everything, and I'm going to tell other people like how they should accept my money. Like, surprisingly, and I'm pretty sure you know this, Elnora, there are a lot of funders who have used this approach.
That's right.
They're very top down. They're very ego driven. And they don't include their stakeholders. They don't include the intended recipients. of the philanthropy. They don't ask them, is this what you really need? Or
that harm the organization.
yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So leveraging with others is really all about collaborations. It's working with other people who also want to give in the same area. It's working with foundations or community foundations, but primarily, and this is the point I really want to drive home, it's working with the intended recipients of the money or the activity to find out, what do they truly need? What do they want? And that goes back to what we were talking about. Everybody has their own unique genius. How would I know? Like, if I'm sitting here in Atlanta and I'm not homeless and I'm going to suddenly start giving money to homeless shelters, how would I know what people need or what they want or whether it's going to work? Like, the expert in that is somebody who actually is, a homeless person. And so putting them on an advisory committee or just interviewing them and collecting a bunch of interviews and talking with people and listening to them, that becomes a major sort of activity within philanthropy. I learned very early on that money was not enough. That although, as you mentioned, money has been a big part of, quote, my success, it's really your work activity. It's your unique genius, like how you apply your skills and your expertise to the world. That's the most valuable thing that you can do. And luckily, earlier in my career, I sort of did well, and so I was able to kind of curate the roles that I took on, so the projects that I took on. That's how I had the ability to work with people like Gavin Newsom, who's the governor now, on the San Francisco Parks Plan, or work with other really great people to do these wonderful projects. Jerry Brown on the Fox Theater. That's the other thing about philanthropy, is that you get to meet people that are really, really interesting in and of themselves. And then they know you and you know them, and it becomes kind of part of a personal relationship, because philanthropy is in some ways personal. It's who you know and who they know. So you have to build those relationships somehow. And so doing it in a community-centered way is really important. The last example that I'll give that's collaborative is, Elnora, you might have participated in this, I can't remember, but about, when was it, 11 or 12 years ago, it was in 2008, basically, when the global financial crisis hit. I put together a collaboration of corporate and individual major donors to address the needs of people whose homes were being foreclosed, they'd lost their jobs, they needed help with their resumes, they needed help with food. For those of us of a certain age, like today's crisis with the pandemic is not the first time at the rodeo. Like, we've been through this before. We've been through pandemics before, meaning the HIV/AIDS crisis, with some of the same actors. Anthony Fauci was the lead researcher then, as he is now. So you learn as you go, but so what I learned kind of at that point was, again, if I think I had, through the funder that I was working with, about $250,000, that's not going to go very far to help people with the immense amount of need that they had in 2008. So I worked with other corporations, banks, Chevron, basically anybody that was funding in that particular geographical area. And I thought we would raise like maybe $3 or $4 million. And at the end of the day, I just basically got on the phone and called people and said, are you in? Can you jump in? And how much? We raised $7.5 million in just 2 months. And the genius of it was working with a community foundation, East Bay Community Foundation, who then had this whole distribution system set up. We had already decided, here are the nonprofits, the food banks, the homeless shelters, like all that stuff. So we're gonna, as soon as the money is collaboratively collected, we're gonna distribute it, we're gonna make an announcement, and the checks go out that day. So that's a brilliant example of a collaboration where a bunch of people came together, and we had this really great community foundation, and it all worked. So I'll pause there, and we can, I'm sure you've got other stuff.
Yeah, going through my are even more activities that you influenced, led, supported, is quite amazing. And so I have a question related to that. So reflect on you as a little boy growing up, and what what led you to where you're at right now? Not as an adult, but as that little boy. Go back to that little boy. Were there influences within your household, within the environment, or just within you that said, "Oh, I'm destined to do this," or I feel this, I honor that? Talk a little bit about that because I want people to understand with that my guests are just like the rest of us. We're
Yeah.
human beings. You pinch us, we're gonna whether it's immediate or delayed, we're gonna react. What is it about your that little boy in you that led to the man you are now?
That's a really great question, and I hadn't thought about that before. But the first thing that comes to mind is when I was 14. So I wasn't that little, but I was, young teenager. For some reason, I don't know how I did this. I'll have to look into this more. I organized. Again, this was a collaboration. I organized a group of friends and schoolmates to clean up the creek. I lived across the street from this park that had been a garbage dump. And then the city started to make it into a park, but they didn't go very far. And so what was left was this beautiful creek called Bear Creek in Oregon, where I grew up, that had tires in it and old abandoned washing machines, all this kind of crazy stuff. And I was there every day with my dog playing since I was a little kid. And so by the time I was 14, I was, I don't know, student body president or something. And I organized this cleanup of the creek. Fast forward to today, it's like a bike path. It's 20 miles now. It's it's a park. The whole thing is finished. But the thing that pops out at me is that it was a collaboration, and I couldn't have done it myself. And I know specifically it led to the kind of approach that I had. I know you served on one of my community advisory panels where I didn't say to all of you, look, I've got this money that I'm going to give out. Do you think it's okay? My approach to all of you was, here is this money that we all get to give collectively. You are all the wise leaders of the Oakland community. How do you think that we should do this? And so it was a collective decision, and you got to basically decide.
Yeah.
And so that's how I connect the two, I guess. I've always really loved collaborations.
And that was a beautiful experience with Bank of America when you're in a leadership role there. And you've been in so many different leadership roles. We can spend maybe an hour just talking about going through each one briefly. Yeah, thank you. So that the essence of your values were already there early. You may not know how they were instilled, but they certainly were there, and you demonstrated it.
Yeah.
Awesome. You remind me of a number of my nieces and nephews who I could see who they were when they were teenagers. And some, like one of my nephews, Antonio, told me exactly what he was going to do by the age of 35. And by 33, he had achieved it all. It's like, oh my God. Cool out. You're just 14 years old. Don't worry about it. It all happened.
Right.
And it did. So it's intention, it's mindset, it's clarity, and all of a sudden you wake up and it's there. Well, you're not surprised because you planned it, and then you took the steps to get there. You took responsibility. You were emotionally connected, and you had an unwavering focus, and took you in different spaces, but you parlayed those spaces to create more. And I want people who are viewing, who are listening, to remember that. Remember their own successes, all the successes and failures, and how you've been able to leverage those to move forward. We have a number of folks on, and folks we wouldn't know are on, but there's a question here. Shamini, brilliant woman. The critical question to ask is, when investing in humanity through philanthropy with your values, what are your expectations? Are you attached to the outcome and associate your ego with it? I think that's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I have a strong response, but I want to hear your response first.
No, you go ahead, Elnora. I think it's a great question.
Detach from the outcome. Leave the ego in your bedroom or in the shower, and allow the universe to allow for whatever you give in support of humanity to just have it manifest in certain outcomes. So I'm very clear about my trajectory, and yet I'm also equally open to being moved by the environment itself, by life itself, in a way that allows me to experience more than I can imagine. Because I'm humble enough to know I only know what I know. I don't know the abundance that's out there. So if I'm working with the group and I share with them expertise, that's part of my philanthropic gifts. If I share with them financial resources or a particular technical tool or whatever, and I have examples, and if I do it and they choose to give it away to another organization, I shouldn't be concerned. That is their gift to another organization. And if I am rabid and so fixed on only that organization using those resources, those tools, which they may not need after all, they may get a windfall. So they may say, we want to assign it to this organization that has greater needs. If I am so stuck in my imaginings of what should be or what should occur, then I've actually undermined the ability of that gift to be, in fact, a gift, that resource to be, in fact, a resource.
Yeah.
And that's what you were talking about earlier, Drew, when you were saying some philanthropic organizations, they give millions of dollars a year, if not billions of dollars a year. It helps their bottom line in terms of taxes and otherwise, and meets maybe their business mission commitment, and yet they have all of these regulations and rules and demands that actually may harm the ability of the organizations to be able to fully use those resources.
Yeah, that was a big trend called impact philanthropy that started kind of in the 90s. And I'm glad to say that it's starting to recede a little bit, because nonprofits were spending way too much time on 15 different proposals to the funder, and then all these site visits and with all this other stuff, and then all the reports and everything. And it was really, I think embedded in this really great question is this notion of paternalism or maternalism, depending on the two binary choices that we tend to be given. But if you attach your ego, the way, when I see that, I'm thinking this person is having a paternalistic approach to their philanthropy. Like they want a certain outcome, rather than just saying, here it is, what's going to happen, and then just being open to whatever will happen. And when I think of this question, and I think about it a lot, I personally like to circle back to nonprofits or projects that I've worked on way after the fact. And as a silent observer, anonymously, just kind of watch what's happening. And sometimes I'm surprised that it's not actually working out the way it was presented to me as a funder, nor as a way that I gave as a philanthropist. But do I care about that? No, I'm actually really excited that it went in a totally different direction and it's having a great impact in its own way. And even in the last organization that I worked with, which worked with a lot of schools, we would work with schools, and sometimes I would just, without staff, go to the school, check myself in, the usual thing, and just sort of see what's happening on the playground at this school that we've had an impact in. And sometimes what I saw was, wow, this is amazing. And sometimes what I saw is, I got to go back and talk to our staff. Like we got to tone this up a little bit. But not having your ego attached to it, I think, allows for the joy of discovery of how philanthropy can impact people's lives. Because again, if we treat people as each having their own unique genius, what you give to them is going to be interpreted through their own genius, and you have to be open to what they will use your gift for.
Yes, and as a follow-on, Shamini indicates that can we let go to that attachment and just do so for the good of humanity? Do we need to associate the value with power and influence? And I think we both just spoke to that. If our values are synergistic with this altruistic set of principles and outcomes, then we are not ego-oriented. We're not tied to a particular outcome, because there may be a greater outcome that we can't even imagine, that otherwise our structure or trying to force fit would undermine or such progress. And then Parthenia writes, good question, because it seems unrelatable to me. My question is, how do you practice philanthropy when you have no money or capital and probably will not become a person of wealth? Oh, that's a powerful question. I'll let you answer that first, and then I'm going to follow.
Well, and I kind of teased the answer for this already. I believe that we're all philanthropists. It doesn't matter whether we have money or not.
Yes.
It's, first of all, finding out what we can contribute to the world around us, whether that's with our neighbors or even within our families, but within our cities, within our counties, within our states, whatever, however you define community. And then using your own unique genius, how you have a certain set of values, how you have a certain point of view, and using that genius to help other people, help benefit the wellness of other people. And if everybody did that all across the world, wow, what an impact that would have. It's not about money. It's just about helping other people do what they need to benefit. Now, having said that, I don't know how many people live on the earth right now. Is it 7 or 8 billion? But whatever the large number is, a lot of us are doing that. And so we just need to kind of amplify the value of it. Like previously, philanthropy was just focused on money. And the radical reimagining of philanthropy that I'm advocating is, no, let's just throw that aside and say that's, money can be important. It does make an impact on certain things. Like I have friends for instance, in Kenya, who are desperate for money to get this project going that I was on the phone with them about yesterday. But it's their personal impact with young people in this community outside of Nairobi that they need the most. And if we all just kind of looked at it and valued it that way, we should be giving prizes for people who've had a big impact in their own personal way, not related to money.
Yeah. And I think that's especially on point for Parthenia Ann. I happen to know this beautiful spirit because she's a family member of mine. And she retired recently. I hope she doesn't mind me sharing. But before she retired, she lived philanthropy. She was constantly giving of her time, almost 24/7, as an educator, as a lead for programs, one in particular. So that question, your response, Drew, is so on point because there are, I'm sure, hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, who could look back and say, Parthenia, you touched my life. And you transformed the nature of what I thought I could be. I'm now a medical doctor because of you.
That's
I'm
great.
a scientist because of you. I pursued my master's degree because of you. I completed my baccalaureate program because of you. So I'm just feeling and sensing all the energy, the life force itself that you influenced throughout your career. So I just want to honor you and say that to everybody. When we think of wealth in terms of faith, how we practice our faith, and it's not about religion, as a friend of mine says very clearly, it can involve religion if you're religious. If you're not, we're all spirits in this human temple, hopefully. We're treating our bodies as temple. So at the spiritual level, understanding who you are, having faith about something, whatever that is, drives you to get up in the morning, that leads you to invest in yourself and others, whether you know them or not, to make a transformative difference. Your family, your physical well-being that affects your emotional well-being, affects your spiritual well-being, that affects your psychic well-being. I can go on and on. And then, of course, finance and fun. So, yes, all of us ought to be wealthy to some degree based upon at least 3, if not all of those criteria. And if one can't happen for whatever reasons, all the others should be able to happen.
Yeah. Well, and this applies to people with money, but also people without money. The way that I think people have the greatest impact with their philanthropy is going back to that notion of, let's assume that we all have $10 million to give, right? What are your values, which we've talked about. So the first thing is identify what your values are as a human being. That's the first thing. Secondly, what are the gaps that you see where giving would make a difference? And that giving can be of your time, but it can also be of your money. So gap analysis is really critical because if you're all over the place and not really focused, people who have worked with me know that I'm a super focused person. You just have to be. If you're not focused, you're not going to have that great of an impact. and it will be distracting. You know, there's kind of a difference between charity, which is just handing out one-off, handouts basically here and there. But philanthropy is sort of a longer-term approach where it's really strategic and it's really focused on the things that you, as a unique human, really want to do. So the second thing is figure out what the gaps are that you want to address. And then third, who do you want to collaborate with to fill the needs in those gaps? And that's also going to be kind of fun because you get to talk with other people and work with other people and learn from other people and hear different points of view, and maybe your own trajectory will be changed a little bit. And then finally, and I alluded to this when I talked about that example with the community foundation, distributing the money or the work. Like, how do you actually go out and do the great thing that you really want to do to help other people? That's a piece that people tend not to think about, and then sometimes it just kind of falls off the radar. Mm-hmm. But do you want to do it anonymously? Do you want to do it with your checkbook? Do you want to do it through community foundations, with your own foundation? There's a time factor involved. Do you want to do everything within your lifetime? And this kind of touches on the spiritual, right? Like, certain religious traditions say, it's the eye and the needle and the camel and all. Like, you cannot get into heaven with all that money. You've got to basically get rid of it while you're here on earth. Well, do people actually do that? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. So there's a lot of really interesting questions to ask yourselves about how do you want to distribute your wealth or your philanthropy, whether it's your own personal approach, your time, your effort, or whether it's money.
Thank you. Jet, can you bring up one of the other questions that our audience has? Our nonprofit serves the poor, yet we have insufficient cash to sustain it. In the world of philanthropy, is there a source that we may use to attract support?
Do you want me to answer that?
Mm-hmm, please.
I think philanthropy tends to be localized. And so what you can do is first talk to your board of directors, if you have one, or your family and friends, or who advises you, basically, and find out locally what are the sort of entities that support what you're trying to do, using affordable housing again. Like, who are the actors in my local community that are already in this space and that are either funding it through their foundations or their donor advised funds, which is a kind of an individual foundation, or they're actually advocating on behalf of affordable housing. Those folks also tend to know, sort of where is the support for this work that I want to do. So it's very localized. So it's a hard question to answer kind of globally, unless we're talking about climate change. So it's very localized, and so I would start with your local community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can't emphasize enough what you said earlier. Be clear about what it is that you want, your intent, that's synergistic with your values. There's something that happens when we are intentional. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, we see gifts that we need that may have already been there. It's like you're looking for your keys, and they're right in front of you, and you can't find them. Where are my keys? And someone said they're right in front of you. Or in my case, I'm looking for my glasses, and someone said, you had them on. So the power of intention, all of a sudden, the thing that you need, that you want, that you have demanded, that you could not see before, all of a sudden the clarity. It's like buying a red car. All of a sudden when you're driving, all you see are red cars. Like, I never saw this many red cars where you never paid attention before, right? So the clarity of what it is that you want to do and why. Because you connect with individuals who have means, who have financial resources, or they have connections to financial resources that your organization needs. They're going to connect with you first. And the degree to which you are clear and how you present yourself on behalf of that organization will make a sea change. Some folks will run toward you and like, where have you been? Been looking for a way to invest in an organization and a person like you. Because let's be clear, usually when people are investing, they're investing in you. And they've done their homework long before they've met you. And the alternative is the inverse. They can run in the other direction. You don't want that. So you want to be clear. The next question, Jet. I'm fulfilled yet want to help others with my time, knowledge, and skills. How do I proceed? This is a person who has a lot of resources, folks.
I think we've talked about that.
Yes.
Time, knowledge, and skills are really your own unique personal contribution to other people. It's not about your money. So understanding that you have your own unique genius, and then taking that out and sharing it with other people and collaborating with people that have similar values and so forth, that's basically what we talked about today.
Mm-hmm.
So, good for you. That's exactly, I wish we could share this message with everybody.
Yeah, and I would add, don't make it a really difficult exercise. I was with one of my nieces, I think it was Zerica, years back, and we were going to get some food. And I saw this homeless person who was on the ground, and I don't even know why I did it. I just did it because it's what we do, right? We just see a need and we just fill it. And the person was asleep, and we got our food. I got in the car. It took us to a place, a thrift store that I go to infrequently, but it's a great place to go and donate, but also get some gems. And I found some shoes, what appeared to be his size. And I went back there. He was still asleep. I put them next to him. He woke up and he was just pleasantly surprised. Uh, no one asked me to do that. And up until now, only she knew about that. and and so that's what you can do. You can just see a need and see if you can fill it. The person didn't ask me. The person didn't say. And if the person had said, no, thank you, I would have taken them and then given them back to the thrift store at no cost or found somebody else who needed it. But the point is, I didn't make it a big deal.
Right.
I was so pressured. It took an extra 10 minutes or maybe 15 minutes of my time. And it was wonderful for both of us. I feel good for the rest of my life because of that and the many other little things that I choose to give myself as gifts. And for me, philanthropy is a gift to myself as I give to others.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it is really selfish for me in that honorable, respectful way.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. What resources available to help me to give or gift my assets wisely? I consider this to be my legacy investment. And I think we've spoken to this too, but you may want to add more.
Yeah, there's a large industry that of lawyers and accountants and bankers, et cetera, brokers that help with what's called wealth management. And people have tended to rely on those folks to help them with their philanthropy. But the part that I like about this question the best is the word wisely. How do I find help to give the gift of my assets wisely? That's a different set of folks. Those are the philanthropic services folks, people who maybe have been executive directors of nonprofits or community leaders or advocates in government affairs for the types of issues that you're interested in. And so putting the two together, like some people find the need to like manage their money. Those are the wealth managers. But when it comes to philanthropic wise decisions, it's all of those stakeholders that we're talking about. It's including the people that you're intending to give the money to and having advisory councils. Oftentimes, an easy way to start this is through your local community foundation. They will have, seminars, all virtual now probably, where donors can kind of learn more about a certain issue and learn about which nonprofits are doing really good work in the community. So that's kind of a jump start on it. But I don't want to take away from the learning process. Like learning is so fun and it's something that we should be doing our whole lives. And it will also keep us alive longer, as all the research shows. Like if you keep learning, you're going to stay around a lot longer. Mm-hmm. So have fun with it, but definitely think about which philanthropic advisors are there locally in your community. And as I mentioned at the outset, this is one of the things that the Atlas community is working on as well. So we can talk about this on another program some other day.
Perfect. And I think the last question, Jet, is it true that people give to people? I think we touched on that earlier. What about causes such as remedying homelessness, health disparities, harmful effects of climate change, etc.?
Yeah. This is a frequent question, and the answer is yes and. Yes, people do give to people, but unless they're in that sort of charity approach where it's just like, I know you and you know me, and like you come up and ask me for $100 for your favorite charity, yes, that is where the people connection is really important. But in a philanthropic approach, where you're thinking long term and you're thinking really strategically, you've got what's called a philanthropic plan. And so every major funder out there has one of these, and they've sort of narrowed it down to like maybe hopefully at the most 3 things that they're giving money to. And so within the first thing that you need to do is find out who are the philanthropic folks in my community that are giving to the causes like homelessness, health disparities, etc. And then within those categories, you then have to kind of cultivate those people. So personal relationships are absolutely important, but first, in philanthropy, you need to find out who are the people that are giving to my causes. And again, you can do research online, but you can also ask advocates in your community, like people who've already received grants from people in each of the areas that you mentioned. They'll have a really good idea of like who's giving to these causes, and it changes over time. There's a time element, right? Like some people will give to, let's say, homelessness for 5 years, and then that foundation gets tired of it. I don't know why, because it hasn't been solved, but it's kind of trendy sometimes. And so you have to kind of understand that what's on people's websites might have changed. And so always call them up and ask them, are your donor categories still the same? And if they're going through a reset, which pretty much last year everybody did because of COVID, the values have probably shifted quite a bit. It's a fun process, going back to kind of what you said earlier, Elnora, like finding out, it's sort of like matchmaking or the dating game. Like finding out like who are the possible people that could give to this cause is really actually kind of fun.
Mm-hmm. And having individuals who are in the industry guide that process is invaluable.
Right.
Yeah, there are, as you mentioned earlier, there are experts. So you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to figure it out alone.
Right.
Well, I think we answered the questions, and unless there's more that comes up in just seconds, I want to say deep gratitude to you. And I am looking forward to having you come back where we drill even deeper and give some examples that people can walk away and actually use in support of their profit and nonprofit businesses, whether they're educational institutions, they are literally product-oriented institutions, service-oriented institutions of other kinds. Yeah, looking forward to that. And there's something that you've conveyed over and over again, and that is philanthropy literally includes everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And we have the power to help one another. Is there more that you want to summarize or add in terms of a summary?
No, I think that's really good, Elnora, and I want to thank you also and to the folks that asked the questions. And the last thing I would say is sometimes we don't even realize what kind of an impact that we can have. And I'll use my own example. I moved from California, which I loved living there, but I also realized I was living in a bubble in California in terms of my impact. Very wealthy, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of good work kind of happening. And I looked around and I thought, this isn't challenging to me anymore. And so I made a choice that you could put in this category of a personal philanthropic approach to the world. And I decided I'm going to move to Georgia. Actually, I didn't decide Georgia right away. I decided I'm going to move to a state that is struggling with its approach to civil rights, to mental health issues, which has become a big issue for me, with arts and culture, nature, et cetera. I looked at Texas, I looked at Georgia, and I looked at a few other states. And boy, am I glad that I moved here to Georgia to have this wonderful opportunity to participate in these 2 Senate campaigns that just concluded successfully, and all the other changes that are happening in this state, which 5 years ago, no one would have assumed that a state like Georgia would be changing the way it is and changing more towards the way that people are actually living their lives. So There are lots of different ways people can contribute to the wellness of other people, and sometimes it's just moving.
That's powerful. You're giving me chills for a number of reasons that we'll talk about later. Our future program will focus for you viewing and those who will see this in the next few days and weeks ahead. Will focus on philanthropy in terms of asset management and specifically your choices and your values. So we will go deeper and thank you in advance for joining us in that show and providing your questions in advance. I think it's going to really not only make a sea change in our thinking as we understand our role in making and contributing. Uh, what is someone's statement I can't come up with right now? Being the change that we want to experience, uh, being the vision that we see, uh, being present in the moment fully, authentically, as though this is the only moment we have. So, being the greatness that we have the capacity to be, and that's what real philanthropy is about. So, I want to thank you for reminding me to come here to this discussion, Drew, and for adding your uh, invaluable gems and leadership stance. Really,
Thank you, my dear, beautiful friend from many years.
wow. Yeah, I'm at a loss. There's so many things I want to think about, but we're going to close out the broadcast today and let you know that we have Lead Live every Wednesday at noon Pacific Standard Time in the US and Canada, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, likewise US and Canada. And wherever you're at on the planet, because we've had folks from the continent of Asia, from continent of Africa, tune in and let us know that this is an invaluable gift to them. And they just wait with whatever they're munching on in front of their televisions, if not on their computers. We're so appreciative that you're leveraging us. And you push us, you ask us questions that are heavy hitting questions. You let us know the kind of topics you want to learn about that are directly aligned with smart and valuable, high quality leadership that reflects a kind of mindset that always adds value. So, thank you. And please continue to take care of yourselves. And even if you're isolated anywhere on the planet, know that you're not alone. We care about you, we think about you, and we are about you. Wado.